Hey there, Mike Dunn with another episode of Tabletop Throwdown. It is actually right before Thanksgiving at the time of this recording, so all of us are probably taking some time out to prepare for the week. I know I was running around like a maniac, going into grocery stores that I didn't want to be anywhere near, but had to go to get those last minute ingredients. But hopefully I won't be doing that tomorrow, which is technically the day before Thanksgiving. So yeah, I'm not holding my breath. Anyway, welcome to Tabletop Throwdown, and we have Mark Julian as our co-host tonight.
Hello.
And a couple of very special guests with us, Talia Rosen and Jason Matthews. Now,
Mike, Mark, thanks for having us on.
Yeah,
absolutely. Now, I haven't met Talia before, so I'm very happy to meet you, Talia. But Jason, actually, we've been in communication for quite some time. Jason through Gamma. And also, he appeared in a little clip on our game duration episode a few months ago, where we got some hot takes from designers about game duration. I honestly, I can't remember where did you land on that, Jason? I'm like, I mean, I don't know what I said.
I mean, there's always a sweet spot, right, for any game, and if the decision space is good enough, then you want it to go on a little longer. But if it's kind of one of these cozy games, then you want it to be done in 35 to 45 minutes. And then there are a lot of games that just miss the mark, and maybe mine are most of them. But anyway, it's part of good design now to try and temper your game design to the amount of time your game remains entertaining.
Well, and I think the thing that we're really curious about is how bad that what's written on the side of the box just misses the mark sometimes, right?
Oh, I ignore it. Yeah. I totally ignore it. GMT has started to get a little more realistic, and they're probably they had been probably one of the worst in terms of estimating the amount of time that their games were going to play in. But I think they've kind of started, sort of like airlines. Now they're adding an extra 30 minutes to boarding time so that they actually leave on time. I think a lot of wargame companies have rounded up 30 minutes, and they're getting closer to the actual playtime.
I like I see a lot now where they'll put like 120 plus. Like it's probably like 4.5 hours, but we can't put that on the box, so it's 120 plus.
That's right.
Yeah. So Talia, you mentioned that you had some thoughts on this that you maybe wanted to share.
Yeah, I mean, I've been gaming for decades now, and as soon as I saw that video, it struck a chord, because I've been complaining about this issue. I feel like since I was playing Elfenland and Citadels and Bonanza in the late 90s or early 2000s. I mean, especially when those games were like 2 to 7 players, and the playtime was totally divorced from reality. But I remember what Jason said that I thought was so funny was that for your games, Jason, I think you gave a time somewhere early in development to the publisher without much thought, and that was what ended up on the box, which makes sense because the playtimes on your boxes don't actually match up with reality at all. But like from the 2 games that I have coming out, like I've obsessed over that number and trying to make it accurate. I mean, with the Supreme Court game, like for years now, the goal has been to make it a 2-hour game, reliably a 2-hour game. And for the other one that I have coming out next year with Rio Grande, like it's been really, the target is around 75 minutes. And I think it's realistic. Like, I don't think, the teaching game counts. I think that adds another 50% on, like a lot of folks said. And then the other thing I thought, your interview with Cole and Drew, I think it was really interesting because they seemed, and I love their games. I mean, Root and Pax Premier are two of my all-time favorites, but they seemed very skeptical of the idea of like a 25 minutes per player or 30 minutes per player, which has emerged a lot with like some CGE games, some Stonemaier games, and I think it's pretty realistic with some of the games I really like Lost Ruins of Arnak or Apiary. Like it really is like 25 to 30 minutes per player, I feel like, which is why I love those as 2-player games, not as 4-player games. But
well, I wonder if they're more advocating for the, instead of taking the sort of a modular approach to that time, they're like, oh, well, we'll just put a range from like the lowest player count to the highest player count.
Yeah, what I thought they were saying was more like their games tend to be more open-ended, right?
That's true.
A game of Oath can take 45 minutes or 2.5 hours, depending on whether it ends in round 3 or round 8. Whereas like the Stonemaier games, the Rosenberg games, they're like very, routinized at this point. So like it's pretty predictable, like that your Arnak game is going to go 25 to 30 minutes per player, which means it's a 1-hour game with 2 players, which I love. And it's a 2-hour game with 4 players where I don't love it as much.
Yeah, I think it's easier to do that with games like, like Lost Ruins of Arnak, where it's the same set of actions each turn. Like you're deciding, which way to go each turn with your actions, but it's doing the same thing over and over again. Yeah. And if you're playing with the same group of people, you'll reliably reach a point where it's 20, 25 minutes per player. Whereas a game of Root, even though the same actions are available to you each turn, the board state is so dynamic and changing with each game that you're really like, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to make the best out of the situation? And it's hard to refine that down into like set amount of time per player that'll be consistent for each game, even if you're playing with the same people.
Yeah, no, that's true, because there's no like hard and fast clock that's going to drive the end.
And then in designs where they leave that up, like the end game triggers are in the hands of the players themselves, then you're subject to this kind of groupthink of the play group, which sometimes is tight, and they're like, yeah, we're going for the victory now, and then sometimes it just meanders like a bad Take That game where no one can win.
Played a few of those.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I want name names.
Well, it sounds like we could probably get a lot more opinions on this, so we'll probably revisit this on another episode. Tell us about is it first Monday in October? Yes,
precisely.
First Monday in October.
Excellent. Now, it's on the Kickstarter. It says that Jason, you developed it, but Talia, you designed it. Tell us a little bit about kind of that dynamic and that like separation of roles in when you were making this game.
It's my absolute favorite split. Talia did all the work, and I complained. And it's like my natural. And then she'd go back and fix the thing I complained about, and we ended up with a finished product. So Talia and I have been friends for a long time, so the project itself sort of spurred out of a conversation. We took a long road trip to Origins, and so we were, I think, on the way back, we had this conversation about subject matters that had never been properly explored by board games. And there are quite a few of them in the kind of political space where I design, typically just things that have never been done correctly or at all. And I mentioned one of them was the Supreme Court. We'd never really had a game that dealt at all with how it worked or what it did, even though there's all this tension and politics and drama around it, so it seemed kind of good for a game. But I said, talking to Talia, I just had never figured out a way to do anything about it. And somehow she took that idea and 10 years later showed up with a game. So it was.
Yeah, so this conversation was in 2011.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
It was a couple of years ago. Yeah, it was in 2011. We were also playtesting 1989 at the time.
Oh, that's right. We were playtesting 19.
I think I had recently played Founding Fathers, and I liked it, but I wanted certain things to be different in it. I wanted things to be different in 1989. I didn't want to design a board game that seemed like way too much work, but he said this, and it stuck with me, and I sort of started to sketch out on a piece of paper some of the ideas for what players might represent and what players might be doing in such a game. And then later that year, I literally just put it on a shelf and forgot about it, and tried to forget about it for years, thinking someone else would make a Supreme Court game, which I'm fascinated by the Supreme Court. And I think the history of the court is so interesting. And then I moved in 2017. And when I was moving, I stumbled upon that piece of paper that I had literally shoved into a bookcase. Wow. And it had a bunch of these things sketched out from the game that have ended up in the game in one way or another. And so I got to my new place at the end of 2017 and tried to put it back on the shelf and forget about it again, but it was much harder at that point to do that. And I was sort of ruminating on it throughout 2018, and then it was 2019 when I really put the pedal to the metal and started working on it fully. And that was actually, of all things, driven by reading the New York Times article at the beginning of 2019 about Elizabeth Hargrave and Wingspan, and thinking, well, if she can do it, I can do it too. And so I remember going to Target and getting a poster board and turning the game from a scrap of paper into a thing and bringing it to a bunch of people that spring, showing it at a convention and working on it all throughout 2019 to get it to a place at the end of 2019 when I could show it to Jason. And I showed it to him at the end of 2019. I was like, you remember that conversation we had 7 years ago? I made a game. And fortunately, I was very nervous about that, but fortunately he was into it. He was excited about it. He had a lot of ideas. And then we spent the next few years hammering away at it. So it
was still on a crappy piece of poster board from Target, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, definitely. I don't know how to use a computer, so it's all colored pencils, index cards, and poster board.
It was the most arts and craftsy project I've ever actually sat down to play, I think.
That's fantastic.
I still played the arts and crafts version at AwesomeCon and Circle DC last year.
Yeah.
Well, I can only imagine, though, hey, you remember that thing we talked about 6 years ago? I made a game. Here it is. I mean, my jaw would hit the floor probably. But I can only imagine. Well, I mean, Jason, that probably happens to you all the time. What am I saying?
I mean, I do. I mean, I'm excited to. I am excited when people bring me interesting designs. The surprising part was not just that it had actually happened, and she'd figured out a way to put a game together on this topic, but it was a good game. That was the thing. You're not really expecting when somebody brings you a project that looks like it was cut out with left-handed scissors or something.
He's not wrong. I'm a lawyer. I don't know anything about aesthetics. When I gave the prototype to Kevin, I said, please don't use any of this. In the,
I was like...
He was like, no problem, I won't.
Nice.
We had to redesign it from the ground up, the visuals. But, Jason was was
That turned out
so
to be quite a. It is a very. It was a difficult design to get the uh, user interface correct. I think what has ended up happening with the art is just absolutely fantastic. I think it's very compelling and has a lot of table presence. But it was a slog because there's a lot of information to keep track of, and if you don't present it the right way, it'll be an annoying game to play.
Right. Right.
and I
Yeah.
was
No.
obsessed with. I was just going to say I was obsessed with the icons being super clear and readable from across the table because I love Demacher. And when the Valley Games edition came out, I don't know if you ever played it, but one of the icons like looked exactly like the other icon from across the table, and it was such a problem for gameplay that I was just like, these cannot be remotely similar. So we probably spent like 9 months just working on the 4 icons and going through dozens and dozens and dozens of versions of it. And luckily,
It sounds
Kevin's.
like exaggeration, but it kind of wasn't.
It's not. That's not even an exaggeration.
Hey, I'm all for it. Full disclosure, I am a former UX designer.
Oh well.
So yeah, you're preaching to the choir here. Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I was like, these. I love these. They're my favorite thing.
Excellent, excellent. Um, now, yeah, I gotta say, I've been I've been keeping a much closer eye on what GMT has been doing lately. Sadly, I have two GMT games that are sitting on my shelf of shame right now. One of them you'll probably forgive me for, and that's Mr. President, because
I
that
won't
is a
forgive you.
beast.
Yeah.
You're supposed to give it to me so I can play it after you play
No,
it.
no, it's mine. I bought it with my money.
Yeah.
And then and this one I'm actually I feel a bit of shamed. I have a copy of Twilight Struggle that I haven't played yet either.
Yeah.
So
I think we've
um,
discussed this before. You're a
yes,
Philistine.
yes,
Ever?
yeah. I'm sorry, but if I'm being completely honest, a lot of that is due to the fact that when I was growing up playing board games, um, I was never interested in the historical board games because, I mean, first of all, in the '80s, that was like 80% of what was out there, right? Um, and I played them. Um, but it's like I how many times can I play Axis and Allies when I have no interest in World War II, right?
Is there even a
Now,
time on this box? I don't see a time, Jason. Why does it have
um,
a time? It says time equals 3 to 5 years per turn.
no,
That sounds about right. It takes
Yes.
about 5 years.
It plays in real time. You can get through the
Yeah.
whole Cold War. It'll only take you 45 years.
well, I better get started then. Jeez,
Yeah, exactly. There is an app, You probably should have
there
gone with
is.
the app.
Oh my gosh! Well, all right. I'll track down the app after we record this.
It's like the film of
And
War and Peace. It's a lot,
well,
a little punchier.
let me finish my thought though. There have been some games recently that have actually gotten me very excited about historical games, and a lot of that is due to the fact that they aren't necessarily historical war games, right? Um, like votes Tory Brown's amazing Votes for Women. I mean, that I love that game. Whirligig's John Company is like I want to get that to the table more and more, even though it makes me feel horrible every time I play it. But that's the point, right? I'm really loving historical games that kind of shine a light on aspects of history that I didn't hear about in school. Um, and I think there's a lot of potential there. Like what I don't know if you've seen Burn the Fort.
Yes, the
Yeah,
Native American designer about kind of Western frontier fortress conflict with the tribes there.
Yes, yes. I haven't played it yet, but watched a demo, and we actually gave that an award at Gen Con because it's just an amazing looking game with a theme that really is meant to make you think. And so, to continue with full disclosure, I backed your game. Um, because I want to learn more about the Supreme Court, the history of the Supreme Court, especially the ones that came before the batch we have right now. Um,
Happier
but
times.
yes, yes. Um, and so like when I saw the Kickstarter page, like I found the theme just fascinating. It does look amazing. Like I can't wait to see that board and how you've set that up in person. But yeah, it's like a whole new genre of games that I previously ignored that I am now like voracious for. I think I backed another GMT Kickstarter a few months back, and that hasn't delivered yet. And and I've just been kind of seeking out these games that are historical but not necessarily war games.
So
And I do want to play Mr. President one of these days. My enthusiasm has waned a little bit in the last few weeks, but I still do want to play it.
so we're of the same kind of generation. I think we just kind of tilted in opposite directions. I got
Mhm.
in a few years after you, slightly, but
Yeah.
Axis and Allies is like my first game, really. But I entered, and all of my friends were playing Dungeons and Dragons, and really
Mhm.
that became the dominant part of the hobby, with SPI dying and eventually Avalon Hill dying.
Right.
And first role playing games, and then ultimately CCGs kind of replacing them.
Mhm.
Um, but and Wargaming had a very near death experience. Its two major thought leaders and prominent companies both went under ultimately.
Mhm.
And I think if it weren't for lessons learned by the Europeans, lessons that Talia is obviously applying in her design, but which were also incorporated into Twilight Struggle because Anand and I are big Euro players, I think wargaming would have died out. But instead, I think what you would find now on two bases is that there's more innovation and interesting experimentation in design and topics occurring in wargaming than there in wargaming. I
Mhm.
use that in quotes here.
Right.
Than there is in the traditional Eurospace, which seems to have hit sort of a brick wall in game design, where they've
Agreed.
decided worker placement is the ultimate, you know, um, the ultimate end state of Euro design. So we're not worried about anything else anymore. Um,
Well,
whereas,
and then the industry as a bigger whole is like just smashing things together and to see what works right now, which
yeah,
is uneven, but has led to some really interesting and compelling gameplay.
for
Um,
sure. I'm
yeah,
being slightly snarky about it, but of course there are lots of great games coming out
I'll
every year.
see.
We've got 5,000 a year, so of
I
course some
know,
of them
I
are just
know.
fantastic. But in terms of like who's really doing weird things that they had never tried before, there's more of it going on in the historical gaming space than there is in the Euro gaming space. And I think there's two reasons for that. One, we're still applying lessons learned from the Euro games. You see that in
Mhm.
Cole's work also, obviously. And two, we're getting more voices in historical game design besides old white guys. And as a result, we're getting topics that are not just Gettysburg for the 50th time,
Yes,
Stalingrad
yes.
for the 50th time. We're starting to see some stuff that has never been explored as a topic for simulation lately. And I love Burning the Fort as an example. There was
Hmm.
a great game that really was it's a war game, but the scale of it was individuals resisting French colonization in Morocco, like the kid, the wife who's hiding a gun, this kind of crazy down to the nth level of detail of resistance. But when was SPI ever going to make that game? Was Avalon Hill ever going to make that
Right.
game? No.
Right.
So it's interesting and new.
Well, and the next two games from Fort Circle after mine are really exciting. There's Peace 1905 and Night Witches, which are both historical games that I'm super excited for, that are non-traditional. And I think, when you get a chance to try them, they're just more innovative than I agree. I mean, I agree with Jason that the German style strategy game market has sort of calcified in a way. And I wrote about this in an article about the tyranny of the kitchen sink, because I love like the early Feld and Rosenberg games, and then it felt like it just got more and more and more when it like jumped past Ora et Labora and Trajan, which is like the warrior of board games, to just like the craziest thing you can imagine. It just gets more and more complicated. And when I entered the hobby really full time, like all in like 2005, like the top 10 were things like Ra and Princess of Florence that I loved and were like streamlined and beautiful in their elegance. And now it's like games that I can't, because there's so much crammed in there, that it's just not my vibe at all.
Well, and then on top of that, like you just mentioned Raw, we're seeing a lot of these great games from like, 15, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, starting to come out with new editions again. And I think that's great because, I mean, for selfish reasons, that was like when I was focusing on video games, right? So I wasn't, I just had a kid there. I wasn't going it, but yeah, I wasn't going anywhere to play some board games or D&D or anything like that. So I missed out on a lot of great stuff. And so a lot of that's been playing catch up, but like the market has grown so big in recent years that the video game industry did this too, where they started doing updated remakes of older games and achieving great success from it. And I'm seeing that happening in the board game space. I just hope we don't get like this game came out 5 years ago and let's remaster it again, which we started getting in the video game space.
I think part of it is we mentioned at the beginning, 5,000 plus games come out a year, and there's a certain level of like exhaustion that comes with that from the consumer standpoint. Like, there's so many things, I don't know what's good, what should I try? And then you see like, well, I know Ra is good and they come out with a new version, so I feel more confident I'm going to buy this game because I know it's good.
Right.
Versus this game could be good, but it also could be terrible. Is that worth my money that might be, not going as far?
That's just become a huge problem, not just for individuals. Like I can see all of us have giant shelves. Our shelves of shame are probably somewhere else also. And so we got stacks and stacks of games. So what the hell do you do with them all physically? But imagine the pressure that game store owners are under, where you've got 5,000 new titles a year. There's not space in a store to do that kind of turnover of titles. And so I think more and more, just in talking to the retailers I know, they've had to switch to this kind of evergreen model where they're, maybe they'll get one or two copies of new stuff in, but mostly they're putting in Raw or Ticket to Ride or the things that they know are familiar and are going to sell. And I guess tragically, that's kind of what bookstores something similar ends up happening with a lot of bookstores as well.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, that's what makes it scary to put a game out into the world these days, because as a fan and consumer of games, I also feel like, oh, there's too much. Like, why would anyone want to contribute to that? But I waited a decade and nobody made a Supreme Court strategy game, so I was like, I guess we'll just go ahead and do it. But yeah, I mean, I was in that position. It's funny that you mentioned that happening now, because I I love El Grande, and I wasn't really in the hobby in '95 when it came out, but in 2005 when the Decennial Edition came out, I pre-ordered that thing. I was eagerly awaiting that thing, and I was so excited when El Grande finally got reprinted. El Grande, Goa, Tikal all got reprinted around 2006, and I was finally able to get my hands on them. And I remember talking to Scott Alden about it, and he was like, I didn't even know those things were out of print. I thought we all had them on our shelves. And I was like, not if you joined like a few years too late. But then I'll have friends come over and look at my shelf and be like, oh, that thing's wildly out of print. Oh, that thing no one can get. And I'm like, oh, I got it for $30 like 15 years ago. And once you have it, you sort of don't notice that these things kind of are out of print the day after they come into existence, it seems like. And it's just such a strange hobby. But El Grande holds up. Jason was over a little while ago, and we ended up having 5 people show up. We did El Grande, and I was like, this game is better
still brilliant
experience than just about anything out there. There's so many games that say they work for 5 players that I'm just like, no.
They barely work for 3. Well, as to the earlier point about as we just keep adding layers and layers to Euro games, which is precisely the same thing that war games did, that eventually painted themselves into a corner where people were buying games but not playing the games, and then eventually they're like, wait, I'm not going to buy anymore if I'm not going to play them. And I feel like the complexity issue in Euro games is leading them down that same dead end.
Yeah. Well, and it also gets to this place where you have conversations with people, like I talk to folks with opinionated gamers, where they think that something like a Wingspan is like a simple gateway game. And I'm like, not if you met my family over Thanksgiving. Like a gateway game is Dixit. It's Wits and Wagers. Yeah. It's not Wingspan. I think like people are getting detached from like what is actually a reasonable middleweight game and not gateway. It's not Ticket to Ride, right? There's so much more there, but because there's, Terra Mystica times 1,000 over on this end, it works everybody's perspectives.
I kind of see it as
the expansions. What are you talking about?
Oh god!
Well, I kind of see Wingspan as like a bridge. I call it a bridge game, right? It bridges the gateway into like the promised land.
Right.
But you're still going to start with Azul, Ticket to Ride, it's that middle step.
Yep.
I think one of the things that happened to me in my like own personal gaming journey is I got really into like the super complicated Euro games. I wanted to play games that were super long and complex, but then you reach a point where like every single time we play, because at the game club in Colorado, there's always new people. I'm spending an hour teaching this game before we could play it.
Right. And
it's just exhausting. You're like, I just want to play a game that we can just sit down and play. So I have more fun playing the hour-long game now than I would the 2.5 hour, giant Lacerda game, or, like A Feast for Odin is still one of my favorite games, but I'm going to play that once a year, versus something lighter like Ra. I could take that off the shelf and we could play it with anybody pretty quickly. So
that goes back to what Jason was saying at the beginning. It's all about like the bang for your buck, right? Like Ra, like in 45 minutes, you get like a brain burning, like fascinating experience where everyone has like different holdings, like 3 minutes in, and has to do these interesting sort of analyses. So it's just like that payoff is so high. My friends make fun of me because I still bring like Stephenson's Rocket and Lowenhertz to game days all the time. And they're like, Talia, there are games from after the 1990s. I'm like, yeah, but why do I need anything after Stephenson's Rocket? Sort of the pinnacle of gaming. I don't know. There's Twilight Struggle.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about First Monday of October.
Which is a name that Jason came up with. I still just call it the Supreme Court game because I'm not good with it. Jason came up with like 27 different names, and ultimately he settled on this name, which was his greatest contribution.
Not by myself. That was voted on. Of course, Fort Circle really
Yes,
decided.
Kevin and Jason picked it.
Yeah, we're all friends and we all live in the same area, so this is a little bit of a problem. We're too into each other's business in a certain way. But first Monday in October is the beginning of every Supreme Court session, and so
Right.
that's what the title of the game refers to. And we had a bunch of other crazy suggestions. Talia had several bad ones that I had
I have some
vetoed.
bad ones. Supreme Court. Yeah, so first Monday in October is this game is coming out next year. It's crowdfunding now. We want to get some more pre-orders in there so we can do a good sized print run. And I'm just so excited about it. It's inspired by like 20 years of strategy gaming, right? I made this geek list that was like the 17 unlikely games that inspired my game about the Supreme Court, and Raw is on there.
Nice.
Everything, all these kind of random games are on there because I don't think that I think the theme is new and undone, but I don't think there's like anything that's revolutionary there, right? I haven't invented deck building or worker placement, but I love area control games. I love El Grande, as we said, and San Marco and Krita and all the rest. And so, at its core, one of the initial ideas was that you were going to be competing for area majority, but that the areas were the sides of the cases. So you have this deck of case cards, and on each case card, you have the two litigants, right? And so those are the areas where you are trying to win the majorities, but only one of those areas is going to score, right? It's whichever party ends up winning the case. And you don't know which party is going to win the case. You have some influence over it. But as these areas sort of move along the board to resolution, you are competing over them. And then it all resolves ultimately around these tracks that are actually inspired by the vaguely. Often I analogize things, and the analogies are a bit strained, but they're inspired very loosely by the score track in Twilight Struggle. That is this tug of war, right? And so these aren't just score track; they're judicial philosophy tracks that are how expansively or narrowly you interpret different provisions in the Constitution, like 4 different clauses in the Constitution. But like one of my best friends is a computer scientist, and you don't need to know any of the history here. Like you can play it and be like, I need those silver eagles real bad. And in my prototype, it looks like a porcupine. So he's like, I need those porcupines. But if you want to think about the history, you can think about like, this is Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, and this is Article 2 of the Constitution. This is, different text and how it was interpreted over time. And so you're playing this tug of war game over this, which determines ultimately which party wins in the cases. And we sort of just over the course of these years, I think uncovered this game that I love playing. Like I've played it so many times. And it's this sort of like strategy game with this sort of really these like machinations that are going on underneath it, where you're competing with other players, trying to sort of form these temporary, you might work together to get someone elevated to the bench. But you might have different reasons why you're doing that. You might, then part ways a moment later when you're on opposite sides of a case. And so I think it can be played on a few different levels. And it is hopefully sort of a classic Euro feel where like everything is there for a reason. We've stripped out mechanics that aren't essential, and it should hopefully feel pretty intuitive once you kind of get into it, is the idea.
I think it is also sort of a middleweight game in that it wouldn't be the one I would show my aunt unless my aunt happened to be like a Supreme Court nerd or something, or a lawyer, possibly. But if you've already played Ticket to Ride and you're looking for, the subject matter is of interest to you, or you're looking for something somewhat a little heavier than that, then I think it does all of that. And I guess in the development space, my main virtue is, although Talia is a lawyer, kind of a real lawyer compared to me, I was always pressing I want all the historical detail to be right, and
Right.
and I want people don't have to learn anything about this game, but if they pay attention, they will. And even if they pay a little bit of attention, they'll know a lot more than most people do about the Supreme Court now, which is, precious little, unfortunately, a lot of the times, and it ends up mattering quite a bit.
I didn't know the first Monday in October was the start of the session.
You've already learned something.
We're learning already.
Yes. So that was actually gonna that's a good lead into my next question. I think a game that did just what you're talking about, that is of course Votes for Women, which I would classify as a fairly medium, even a little medium, a little lighter on the side, a little on the lighter side of medium. But the one thing that I found really intriguing about the design of that game is how it used like historical moments as touch points, but it never really felt like you were on rails. Like it did a little bit, but not too much. Now, obviously, this game spans a period of time in actual history. How did you, Talia, how did you balance like that kind of maintaining the historical context, with Supreme Court justices coming and going and so forth, with like player agency, like making sure that players understood that they could maybe do something a little different than history did if it came down to it, or
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm assuming. I don't know. I'm curious.
Yeah, no, it was really fundamental that players not feel like they're on rails to me, or like it has to go the way that it actually went. And this is actually something Jason and I
mean, even Ticket to Ride isn't necessarily on rails.
That we debated, a lot.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
So, yeah, I mean, even just something as simple as it was important to me that the case cards, not indicate on them which party actually won in history. And Jason and I debated this, and I think there was at one point there was a desire to we should indicate on there that which of these parties won. And I said, we're going to do that in the historical supplement. I'm going to write a paragraph about every single one of these cases, and I'm really happy with how those paragraphs came out. But that's going to tell you what actually happened. But in the game itself, you're not going to know, you're not going to care, because everything can turn out differently. So we have 24 real cases that you're going to be playing through. Only 18 appear in any given game. But so they're all real, but how they come out is entirely up to the players, and also entirely up to the justices deck. So then we have this deck of almost 60 justices, right? And they're all real justices. These are 60 folks 59 folks that served on the court. And but in any given game, so we have these first 15 are they're stack shuffled, sort of like in Twilight Struggle or Through the Ages, right? So we break it into 3 eras. So the 3 eras sort of helps it feel a little bit like, okay, we're actually living this history. But if anything,
Votes for Women did that too.
Yeah, but if anything, I've allowed the players to sort of deviate, because there is a possibility of one of those early justices living 150 years, which I think the historians really hate. That God Washington might be there on his throne of bones, deciding Brown v. Board or Roe v. Wade, but
it allows a wince I see on Jason's face.
Yes,
love it.
Yes, I knew it. It's an ongoing wince.
He definitely wanted the game to be more historically tied, and it is, I think, through these 2 decks of cards that are all heavily researched and totally real. But the pacing of how the game unfolds allows the players to really control it. The other thing that happens is that a third of these justices are not making it on the bench in any given game, because you always have 3 candidates. Whichever one gets the most support from the players collectively is going to get onto the bench. Whichever one gets the least support gets thrown back in the box, never to be seen again. And the one with the middle amount stays on and gets another shot in the next round.
Nice.
And so that really makes each game different. I mean, having played it like 100 times, like you just don't see the same combinations again. And then with the cases, again, you have 24 in the box, you play with 18. And so it turns out differently each time. It's all rooted in what really happened, but how your game turns out and which parties are going to win is really going to depend on the deck composition and then the players. And then the other debate we had about the historicity is that for each of the three eras, I really wanted there to be the same number of free speech cases, commerce cases, executive branch cases, so that you don't need in teaching the game to be like, hey, just so you know, in this first half of the game, there's going to be more of this thing that you need to focus on, and the second half, more of this thing. You don't need to know anything about the deck composition. The other thing is like the justices, if you dealt out all of them, all of these tracks would get back to zero because like I am a Eurogamer at heart. When like if you really dealt out every justice, I mean, you can't really overly simplify their philosophies into a track. But, that's not how it is. But I love Twilight Struggle, but I always joke with Jason that the worst part is when you're teaching the game, you have to warn someone, like, don't put your influence in France, don't put it in Egypt because of de Gaulle and because of Nasser. So you like have to know the deck composition, even in that first play, to make plays that are even remotely sensible. And it was so important that like everything be researched, but that the deck composition be sort of more Eurogamey. And so it's a hybrid that I think works, but it makes Jason wince, as you say.
The underlying engine, the mathematical engine, is very Euro. It's very balanced, balanced in ways that history is not. But Talia was very good about. So there are 60 justices in that deck. That seems like a lot, but there are actually quite a few more that are not part of the game. Ones that you wouldn't have heard of. Mostly, almost everybody that anybody who's even remotely familiar with is somewhere in the game. Same with the cases. But so by kind of curating both the justices and the cases that are highlighted in the game, you get a nice sense of the history of the court, but with some bending for playability and for balance, which is something that I had, with Founding Fathers, we had to do similar compromises because, in point of fact, most of the people who showed up to the Constitutional Convention, surprise, surprise, thought we needed a new constitution. The ones who didn't feel like we didn't need a new constitution didn't show up. So you have a same kind of self-selecting problem. But I think what Talia has done with the design in terms of the balance will make sure that it's appealing for crossover gamers, and that's super important because that's kind of the space that Fourth Circle is working on, this kind of historical gaming, but not just for war gamers, basically. Because you don't have to tell a war gamer, Talia, not to invest in France. We all know it already.
Jason likes to point out that I don't know anything, which he's not like. But,
so I'm curious, in First Monday, when you have cases where one side is going to win or the other, are there any? I assume there are cases where it's very clearly like a normal person would want one side to win, like the other side is whatever the losing side historically. Like in the game, do you have the context of like what the cases are, or is it just the names of each side? And then how do players, like if it's going to get me more points or help my strategy to influence the historical losing side, how do players deal with that? Does it like feel bad? They're like, oh, I'm rooting for the not good side in this case.
Yeah,
I think normal may have shifted recently, but yes.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good and a really important question, and I think that for many of these cases, I don't think players will know just looking at the game, which side actually won. There's a lot of surprising results in history, whether we're talking about like the Sedition Act cases from like the early 1900s, or some of the equality cases in the 1800s. But it's not like abstracted. Like, it is clear from each card what the core issue was in the case. There's this sort of statement on the card that gives you that flavor of what the case was fundamentally about.
Gotcha.
And you know which provision of the Constitution it's tied to interpreting. And so, yes, I mean, there are cases in here dealing with really weighty and uncomfortable issues that I think are going to make players think twice about where they want to kind of push and pull the court, and where they want to put their clerks in order to win those area majority victory points. And, you know, I've found that it actually players ultimately, you know, are going to play to, I think, usually to earn the most points. You've been assigned these philosophy goal cards, and your philosophy goal might be the Louisiana Attorney General's office, or something where, yes, it makes sense for you to play, so that, you know, for Dred Scott to lose, or for the Board of Education of Topeka to win. But I want the game to like put people in those positions where they think about like what that means, and like what that world would have looked like if the case had come out this way or that way. So, yeah, I mean, it reminds me of the war games I've played over the years, where I'm playing a side that I may not, or definitely don't feel comfortable with or agree with. But I don't think it means that I'm not going to, you know, experience this historical simulation, like, in order to kind of better understand it.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting way that you put that I hadn't thought of. That you know, in the game it might make sense. I get more points, I do this, but it opens up a space to reflect on that, like you said. Like, well, what if this decision had gone that way? Like, what does the world look like? That's really, it's a really cool way to think about it.
Yeah, the first time I won votes for women by crushing the suffragette movement. That little endorphin rush was a little short-lived.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what Fort Circle games do a little bit, and other games out there. I mean, John Company, certainly, right?
Oh,
like,
gosh,
they
yes.
make you feel maybe a little
I'm
uncomfortable.
really glad I'm not British when I play that game.
Yeah.
Really glad, because I don't think I can handle the guilt.
Well, if you've ever played, do you know Pierre Sylvester's King of Siam by any chance?
Yeah.
There's a brilliant little tight little area control game where sometimes you play as these three different factions within Siam, but if you force a tie in a region, then the Brits come in and declare like ownership of that region of Thailand, and if you do that enough, like, it changes the victory condition completely. And this really interesting.
Oh, wild.
And can get you a win through this alternate sort of ahistorical victory condition, but you also feel like, oh no, what have I just done?
It's the King is Dead. You played that, Mike?
No.
Oh,
yeah.
well,
The King is Dead. It's redone with Scotland, England, and Wales, but the first iteration of the game has this really interesting commentary on colonialism and the dangers of factionalism for these small countries who are trying to avoid European domination.
Yeah, they definitely took all of that out in the remake.
I didn't know they made it.
One way or the other, you're getting dominated by the English, and the King is Dead.
You know, you could probably make the same game, just theme it to the part of the world that
that's right.
Colonized, right?
That's right.
So I know that at least, you know, in my lifetime, the Supreme Court has largely been characterized, you know, in my studies at school and by the media as being pretty much apolitical, and I can't help but wonder that how inaccurate that assessment may or may not be, because typically when something is said that boldly, it's usually not 100% true. And it certainly isn't these days. But I'm curious if the game captures any of that political kind of spice that kind of went into those moments in history.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the game captures is that things have been pretty wild since like 1801.
Yeah.
Like the cases, in reading about these cases from the early 1800s and these justices from that time period, even something that is as famous as Marbury v. Madison for lawyers. I don't know if non-lawyers have heard of Marbury v. Madison, but it's like a foundational case that at its heart, from I think it's like 1804. Let me find this here. 1803. So this was like a couple of years after the court was founded. Right. And it's the case there where the court took for itself the power to determine whether or not laws are constitutional. But it was about whether this 1801 Judiciary Act that was passed like weeks before Jefferson took power by the like Adams-driven Congress, and created a bunch of new judgeships for Adams to fill, whether or not like those judges could then take their seats. And it's just wild to read about that, to read about the restrictions on free speech, like throughout the 1800s, throughout half of the 1900s. Like when I read about these things, when I read about, these cases, it's sort of like astounding. It astounded me in law school to read about like things that I could not have imagined happening throughout hundreds of years. So like what it's done, if anything, is just opened my eyes to the fact that like these justices in these cases have been kind of like, I don't know, the scientific term, I guess, is like bonkers for like hundreds of years. Like it's always been a bit wow. Like, and I think that's really helpful historical perspective to understand that like we have been muddling through since the very beginning. And the game covers from 1789 to 2009. So it's not, there was a point in development where it was like, I want it to be 2 hours. I want it to cover about 200 years. Like, I'm not going to keep adding a new justice or case every time, like, I spend another 5 years working on this thing. So let's, like, cut it off.
You got to leave some room for expansions.
I really don't want to do that. I feel like it's very, like, it is what it is. And like,
so there's no presidential immunity promo card?
There's nothing that needs to be added. I think it like.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
I got addicted to like Carcassonne expansions and Age of Steam expansions, and I get very hooked on expansions. And so like, I kind of love the idea that the game is the game, and there isn't really anything else you need. Now that being said, because it cuts off in 2009, most of the current justices aren't in the game, and so if you do go on the crowdfunding, you will. Kevin wants to make sure everyone gets like the rest of the current court as cards. So you'll see on the crowdfunding page, like you don't need to play with
those.
them.
Those are the promo cards.
Those are the promo cards, or like the current court, just so you can have the current court. And then there is a tier where you can turn yourself into a justice, which was not my idea. And I did come up with Jason's card. And I felt a little bit bad about it, but Jason, did you notice the card? I developed your philosophy symbols and your flavor text.
Oh, I really I was more concerned about the photo we used. I should have really seen what kind of Nazi you made me into.
I took your photo from your employer's website, and then I wrote that you had co-designed 4 different popular board games from 2005 to 2010. Followed by various spin-offs and re-implementations.
I guess how generous. The real question is, what is my death die? Did you give me a D6 or a D4?
Oh, I gave you a D4.
I'm already aging out. That's
But
great.
I have you. I sort of gave you like more Chamber of Commerce sort of philosophy than anything. So it was a fun exercise to design your card, and then to explain to Kevin that I was never going to have a card from me. Do unto others as you will never have done to yourself.
That's a total random question to do with the cards,
Yeah.
but so the 6 current justices, when you're making a game, like how do you use their actual pictures of those people? Like because they're public figures, is there like image in the public domain?
Yeah,
Yeah. So the nice thing is that everything that the U.S. government creates is public
this is
domain.
in the
So
public domain.
Yep.
NASA's everything that NASA
Owned
creates
by us.
is domain.
Right.
The justices have public domain images, so that's helpful. And then I wrote the text on the cards. And then, yeah, these 59 justices, the base 59 justices, are what the game is really designed around. If you wanted to play the current court, there'll be rules that come with it where you could add those in and then also take out a corresponding number of cards, because the clock, we talked about at the beginning clocks, but like I love like that a game like Tigris and Euphrates has like 2 simultaneous clocks, and either one can trigger the end, whether it's the treasures or the tiles. And so this game also has 2 clocks. It has the cases deck and the justices deck, and when either runs out, the game ends. And I want it to be like some tension about which one's going to run out first. And so you can't just add 6 cards to this deck. Like there'll have to be rules about swapping out cards. But yeah, either can end. And then the other thing I wanted is this hard clock. So this deck will have 15 cards in it when you start. You'll flip up 1 every round. And so the game cannot go more than 15 rounds. And if the people like to get rid of justices quickly, it'll go 12 or 13 rounds probably. You'll go through this deck faster. But it, I've had these games, some of these Euro games, that just, if they don't have a hard and fast way to end, it can just be interminable.
Right.
Like,
right.
So, so that's how we have the images. And then the die on them, you'll see, this was part, Kevin was like, do we need this? Because it's more components that will cost more. But most of the justices use a 4-sided die, which means when you try to retire them, there's a 25% chance each time that they retire. But in each era, I really wanted like some justices who'd been on the bench for decades to use a 6-sided die. And then I love the 3-sided dies that I discovered in Corne von Marshall's Power Boats. So we also have 3-sided dice on some of the justices. And that's a fun little piece of chrome that I like.
Nice.
Maybe a little superfluous, but it does give it a more historical flavor, and it also makes you like want to go on Roger Tawney, even if you're going to feel bad about it, because he gets that nice 6-sided die. So
that's the Dred Scott guy. I should say also, Mark, not exactly directly to your question, but in terms of like some of the materials and some of the extras that are part of the game box, because kind of this historical piece of it is so important to Fort Circle Productions. Every Fort Circle game has a nonprofit partner. In this case, the nonprofit partner is the U.S. Supreme Court Historical Society, which is located a couple of doors down from the Supreme Court on Capitol Hill. And
Nice.
They have been incredibly useful in terms of helping us both with kind of materials, suggesting cases. Super excited to have the game out, and they've been helping us navigate any of those kinds of problems.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And finding
Fantastic.
some really cool stuff to
Well,
put in the box. Yeah.
And I imagine like having this wealth of like imagery and historical documentation is an excellent way to sidestep the current AI art issue in the industry.
That is true.
Near it, yeah.
You can trust me when I say that Dom Hall, our artist, is very much a human, although an Irish one.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not touching that. That said, I do have some Irish blood myself, so. Well, fantastic. So this this Kickstarter is ongoing. It'll still be going in let's see, we will be publishing this the week of PAX Unplugged. So and I believe the Kickstarter lasts until the 20th, correct?
December 20th.
Excellent. December 20th. So yes, fantastic. Plenty of time to go check it out and pre-order. Looks like you guys have already made the $10,000 goal and have actually surpassed it quite a bit.
We made the goal in 37 minutes, and I refreshed for all 37 minutes to see.
Fantastic.
The night before, I was like, maybe after 10 years of working on this, 0 people will back it. Like, that was like a legitimate fear I had. Maybe not legitimate, but like, I was like, what if 0 people support it? So then it's launched, and it was like the longest 37 minutes of my life, but also the shortest. So we've blown by it, which is super exciting, but I'm hoping that we get a lot more people to check it out, because it's just been such a labor of love for so many years. It's Kevin and Jason have just poured so much into it. The production values, the art from Donald is just like
it looks gorgeous. It looks great.
Yes, the table presence is amazing, and and people should know that like Fort Circle doesn't do, as I don't believe, late pledges or a pledge manager or anything. So you really have to.
Oh, that's good to know.
Do it by December 20th. Like there is no like wiggle room there. People like who pledge $1, I think, often figure they'll go in later and do it. But so it's.
But this will be available at retail after everybody gets their pledges, right?
It will, but I have to say that, well, you know how all of this is gone. Things get hot and then they're gone, and then you got to wait 2 years before you can get another Chinese printing through the process. So I really, even if I wasn't involved in this game in any way, shape, or form, I'd be like, you should grab this. And if you're a historical gamer, you should grab it.
Yeah, I mean, Votes for Women, I was so happy to have a first printing because it sold out like so fast, and then it took years to get the second printing.
Oh, yeah.
Which was a shame. And so I think that, like, I hope people check it out and think about it. I know there's too many games on your shelves already. I know that problem very well. But, it's not another game about the Renaissance or about, Egyptian pyramids. So it's really... I love playing it. I hope to get to play it with like so many people at conventions in the year to come, and that people really enjoy it. So
I hope we get to play it with you at conventions in the year to come. I hope we get to play it at PAX Unplugged with Jason in a couple of weeks. I'd love to get a video of some gameplay up to help you guys on that last leg of the Kickstarter if we can.
Awesome. So I'll get Jason a copy. We'll get it up there.
Excellent. No, I'm really excited to give this one a shot. Actually, that's funny because now that makes 2 historical games that I am excited to take for a spin at PAX Unplugged. The other one being Cole and Joe's Molly House. That's great. We got to play that last year, and it has changed. Well, we will put the link to the Kickstarter in the description, as well as whether you're watching this on YouTube or checking this out as an audio podcast. We'll have a link in the description for this episode. Talia, it was a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for spending some time with us this evening and telling us about your awesome game. And Jason, always great to see you. We'll look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. Definitely, we've got a lot more great guests lined up in the coming weeks. Thank you so much for joining us, and good luck with the rest of the Kickstarter, and congratulations on the success you've had so far.
Thank you so
much
for
having us. Have a great Thanksgiving, everybody.
Yeah, you too.
You as well.